Hi everyone. So we're continuing our learning of Mishnah of Shabbos, and we're up to the second Mishnah of chapter 1. This Mishnah, it's kind of in anticipation of the third Mishnah, which has to do with certain activities that you won't do when it's close to the start of Shabbat. This has to do with activities, Mishnah 2, that when you haven't yet prayed Mincha during any day, to not engage in these activities lest you get preoccupied with something, too immersed in something goes wrong, and then you run out of time and you can't pray Mincha. So let's see that, and then we'll lead up to Mishnah 3, which is more explicitly Shabbat relevant. Lo yeshev adam lifnei hasapar samuch lamincha ad shitpalel. A person may not sit down before a barber shortly before the time of Mincha until he prays. Lo yikanes adam lemerchatz velo levurk seki velo leechol velo ladin. So neither may a person enter a bathhouse, nor a tannery, nor may he begin to eat, nor to judge in the court. But if he started, he need not interrupt. So this has to do with what happens if you're at the barber and a tool breaks and you have to wait a long time and then you get stuck. Or if you're in the other ones with the bathhouse or the tannery, maybe in the tannery that's your work, and you see that a major problem is going on with all of your goods, and then you have to consume yourself with that, and you're not able to, you miss the time for prayer. But if he started, so if he's engaged in this activity because he knows that he'll have time at a later time to pray Mincha, he need not interrupt and say, oh, I shouldn't have done that, it's okay, as long as he has a clear idea of when he'll be able to pray. Mafsikin likrot kriyat shema velo mafsikin litfila. So this has to be about something else. It has to do with someone who doesn't have a regular job but is a Torah scholar who learns all day. So they must interrupt for the recitation of Shema, but they need not interrupt for prayer. So because the difference there being, which we actually learned back in very early when we were learning Mishnah of Brachot, this came up, the difference there. Shema being biblical, and the specific time-based prayers being something like a rabbinic institution, different level of obligation, such that when it should or shouldn't interrupt Torah study. Okay, Mishnah 3, the more specific to Shabbat one, or the one that is specific to Shabbat. Lo yetzei hachayat b'machto samuch lechashecha shema yishkach vayetzei. A tailor may not go out with his needle shortly before nightfall, lest he forget and go out. Velo halavlar bekulmoso. So neither should the scribe go out with his pen. So why these two cases? It can mean one of two things. So either it could be the Mishnah is just using these people because most of the time the person with the needle is a tailor, most of the time the person with a pen is a scribe. It just works that you choose these two people to describe these two items. It pairs nicely. Or there's something more specific being said here. So we know that for malacha, for one of the forbidden labors of Shabbat, to be fully on a biblical level, a biblical prohibition, it needs to be done in a usual manner. If it's done in an unusual manner, then may only be a rabbinic prohibition. So it's very typical for a tailor or for a scribe to carry the tools of their trade in their specific ways. So maybe a scribe has a pen tucked behind his ear, and that's not typical for a normal person. That would be atypical for a normal person. But for a scribe, it's very typical to walk around like that. So maybe it's saying we have this prohibition of not doing it even when it's close to Shabbat, it's not Shabbat yet, lest he do it and violate a biblical prohibition if Shabbat comes in. If it were just to begin with a rabbinic prohibition, then we would say, Ein gozrin gezer legezer. We don't put one decree of the rabbis upon something that is already a preventative measure for transgressing it. So we wouldn't do that unless it were the concern that you might come to violate something biblical here. Okay. Velo yifaleh et kalav, velo yikra laor haner. So one may neither delouse his garments nor read by the light of the lamp. So these are two activities that you need very strong light. So if you're doing it closely to next to your oil lamp would be in this case, that's what the problem would be with here, which we'll say in a second. If you were doing these activities very close to your oil lamp, on Friday afternoon leading into Shabbat, and then you got caught up and you kept doing it on Shabbat. The concern here is that when you have this type of lamp, you need a very strong light for these activities. You're going to maybe tilt it so that the oil goes to the wick, and then you to make the fire stronger, and then you're doing a biblical prohibition. So it has to be, we're having a concern here about lest you come to violate a biblical prohibition should Shabbat come in. Be'emet amru hachazan roeh hechan hatinakot korim aval hu lo yikra. Indeed, they said, the teacher, the word here is used as chazan, which is also like what we use for the cantor, but in this context it means someone who's teaching children, may see where the children are reading, but he may not read. So there's a difference between our concern of tilting the lamp and doing a potential biblical violation of how we relate to the teacher versus the students. So what are some differences? Maybe the students are kind of happy if the light goes out. They're not going to try to, I have to adjust the lamp right away so I have more light so I can keep learning, so I can keep reading. Maybe they're happy their lesson ends for the day. Another difference might be that the children are have a lot of reverence for their teacher. They're not going to do something without asking or without the teacher's permission. But the adult, the person teaching, shouldn't read close by the lamp lest they come to do this prohibition. Kayotsevo. So similarly, just going to do something that compares this kind of preventative measure. Lo yochal hazav im hazava mipnei hergel avera. So similarly, a zav may not eat with a zava, since it may lead to sin. So what is this talking about? Zav and zava. So we have the normal case of a genital emission for men and women, being for a man being a seminal emission and for a woman being menstruation, and then we have zav and zava, which is an unhealthy, unnatural kind of flow. So these two people, even though it's a biblical state of impurity, being a zav or a zava. So even though they're not going to give each other higher level of biblical impurity, it's still a prohibition for them to be together physically, intimately, and therefore they shouldn't even eat without making some kind of indication, something on the table, something that separates them, that makes it clear that they're in this state, lest they come to be physically intimate in any way. So it's using that, the mission here is just comparing this case to our cases that have to do with Erev Shabbat, being close to Shabbat, and the things that we, the activities that we prohibit, lest you come to be doing them, not realizing Shabbat comes in, and continuing to do them, and therefore having a biblical prohibition, a violation. Okay, thank you so much for joining, and see you next week.